Today we're at Gigi's garden and we're going to check out tomatoes. Gigi has two 4x8 plots in this wonderful little community garden. So while Gigi is out of town taking care of family members, we're taking care of her garden. And you can see she's got a plethora of fresh tomatoes. Today we're going to try our luck at canning tomatoes at home. We have two different varieties of tomatoes. We have both the heirloom tomatoes, which is the ones here with the ridges in it, and then we have some Best Boy tomatoes as well. We're going to can those in separate jars so we don't mix them, so we can enjoy the specific taste of each. Over here we've got a large pot of water on the stove boiling. We're sterilizing our jars. We've pre-washed them in the dishwasher, but now we're going to sterilize them by boiling them in water for a few minutes. And over here we have a bowl of water waiting for use as an ice bath, and our cutting board, which is where we'll be putting small slices in the tomato skins to make them easier to peel. We also have a smaller pot of water boiling over here. This will be the saucepan where we're going to blanch our tomatoes and peel them before we finish the canning process. So we've canned tomatoes before, but always using the hybrid versions of tomatoes, which are bred for their roundness and makes them easier to peel. Now what we haven't done was we haven't tried to can these heirloom tomatoes that have these wonderful ridges and are rich in flavor, but boy, they sure look like they're going to be difficult to peel. I guess we're going to find out whether or not we're ever going to try this again with heirloom tomatoes. We're starting this project at about 9 o'clock in the morning, and the one tip I will give you is make sure you have plenty of free counter space available to work, and, at least for me, a full cup of coffee. We've pre-washed our tomatoes, but you know what? You can't have tomatoes that are too clean, so we're just going to go ahead and re-wash these again. We've also removed the stems as best we can. Later on, we'll be cutting out that center portion because it gets a little hard when you're canning and they're preserved. Now, some people like to use a vegetable wash to clean their tomatoes. If you want to, you can, no big deal. But remember, these are going to be placed in boiling water and peeled, and then be covered again in boiling water for sterilization and final processing. So I wouldn't get too hung up on using vegetable wash unless you want to. No big deal. So now that our tomatoes are washed, we're going to go ahead and put a small X in the bottom of each one. This will allow us to peel the tomatoes easily after they're blanched. So now we're ready to blanch and peel. We've moved our tomatoes closer to the stove. We have water boiling in a small saucepan, and nearby we have our ice bath and resting area. What we're going to do is we're going to take each one of these tomatoes, put them into the boiling water, then fish them out, put them in the ice bath, let them cool down, and then we'll begin the peeling process. We'll blanch a few at a time and cool them, continuing that process until we have them all done. Then we'll peel them all at the same time. We'll be using this slotted spoon to fish the tomatoes out of our boiling water here and move them over. It's easier that way, and like I said, we like to do 2 or 3 at a time rather than the whole batch. You can do it any way you want. So we're going to follow along with this first one. We're just dropping the tomato into the boiling water. You see those split at the top. We're moving it around just a little bit. We're going to add a little bit more water to this in a little while. We'd like to do our bigger tomatoes first and then move on to our smaller tomatoes. You see I have the slot there at the top. We're waiting for this to wrinkle or peel, and once it does, we'll pull it back out of the water. We'll go faster once we get going. I'm just showing you this one for illustration purposes, and then we'll start moving at a much faster pace. And you can begin to see the tomato here is wrinkling just a bit, and this means it's about ready to come out as it wrinkles and splits a little bit. Now we have our first tomato sitting in the cold water ice bath. We'll be adding more ice later on again, just showing you this for illustration. And as you can see at the top of the tomato, the skin is split, which is going to make it easier to peel off. And as promised, we've continued the process with a few more tomatoes in our saucepan. Like I said, this will speed up the process. We probably have 3 batches to do in this small batch process. Okay, we have in front of us the tomatoes that have been through the blanching process and through the ice bath. We've peeled a few to show you how easy the peeling really is. The peeling literally just comes off this easily with your thumb and fingers. Of course, make sure your hands are clean and sanitized before you do this. And you're left with a fully peeled tomato. And then we're going to cut out the center part here on each one to get that hard stem out of the way. And once that's done, your tomatoes are ready to can. Now, one more tip. Larger ones, to make it easier, it's probably easier to half them or quarter them. That way they go into the bowl or into the jar more easily. And they're also easier to eat if you decide to eat them as a treat instead of using them in some other item. So there, that one is ready to go in the jar. We'll go through this process until we get them all done. Here's our jar. Each one of our jars has been sterilized in the boiling water, and we've added 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. It is for the acidity. It'll help the preservation process. So we're gonna go ahead and finish peeling all of our tomatoes. So our hybrid tomatoes have yielded about 4 quarts of tomatoes. We're going to fill the jars with hot water to within 1/2 inch of the top before we put our tops on. With the boiling water loaded, we used a plastic spatula to make sure there were no air bubbles left. Then we pushed down the tomatoes, rechecked our water level, and made sure it was about 1/2 inch from the top. So now we have 4 quart jars, wide mouth quart jars full of tomatoes, covered with boiling water, tops applied. Next we'll screw on the lids, just finger tight, and finally put them into boiling water. Now we have our 4 quarts of tomatoes in our canning pot. We're gonna cover the lid, and then we'll let them boil for about 45 minutes before letting them sit, and that'll be almost the end of the process. So the tomatoes are in their jars and on the stove boiling. And as I told you earlier, I was gonna wait and do the heirloom tomatoes later because I hadn't done them before. And I thought, well, they look kind of difficult to peel. So now we're gonna get busy and start blanching and peeling these beautiful heirlooms. So I did manage to get 3 smaller jars of the heirloom tomatoes, but as expected, they were much more difficult to process and peel. And one turned out to be a little bit too green to finish, so it'll go into a sandwich a little bit later. One final note, even though my tomato quart jars were completely packed and packed down before I put them into the water bath, the fact that I used the raw processing method resulted in the shrinkage, so you see the bottoms of the jars are a little bit empty. This is referred to as fruit float. This is perfectly safe. There's a way to avoid it. It's a hot processing method. Takes a little bit more time and a few more steps. Maybe we'll try it next time. So there you have it, 7 jars of wonderful canned tomatoes, just under 2.5 hours of total elapsed time, including some time for retakes. And now we're ready to start enjoying.